Not to say that the Jaws doesn't have uncomfortable, it has horror scenes, that can be scary or anything else. Like Gwent at the end is definitely, I think, the peak of this movie actually being kind of unsettling to watch. A huge part of that being Robert Shaw's performance.
Right.
It's just like, oh man, that seems like genuine terror. He actually did die several years after this movie, just a few years later. So that for whatever reason, that scene has always been oddly haunting to me. Because I've never been alive when Robert Shaw was alive. Plus, I heard this recently, just hearing about Robert Shaw in real life, about his alcoholism, and how there were plenty of people that said when he wasn't drunk on the set of Jaws, he was a super nice guy. He was drunk all the time.
Yeah.
When he was sober, he was great.
Right.
He was drunk almost the entire time. He actually tried to be genuinely drunk during the USS Indianapolis story, but they had to redo it later because he was too drunk. So he just acted it later, acted drunk. Because really drunk, it was unintelligible, which is hilarious and awesome. But certainly not to suggest that Jaws isn't an effective horror movie, but it's a very different kind of horror movie than either of the other two we watched for this episode. It's an entertaining movie. It's also two different movies in some ways. There's the first half on the island, and the second half that's the adventure movie out on the boat chasing the shark, of just our three main characters, essentially. I will say that before we get too deep into the weeds, necessarily, that I think the second half of the movie is way better than the first half, personally. And I do like the first half a good deal, but I have little problems with it. And I think watching it again this time, which again, I don't know how many times I've seen it, the thing that bothered me the most was Sheriff's wife. There's something about her that's almost a little bit too exaggerated. Ellen Brody. But there's something about her, like, she laughs a little bit too intently at Richard Dreyfuss.
Right.
She's, I don't know, like, I'm trying to define exactly what it is. There's something that's like, probably my favorite moment with her is whenever she sees the book that her husband's been looking at the sharks, and realizes that she wants her kids to get off of the boat.
Yeah.
Because before that, she's like, "Oh, let them play. They're not actually in the water. They're just on the boat."
Right.
And then she sees that book and tells them to jump off. But there's something almost just a little bit too hysterical about her, and she's not like the biggest presence in the movie. But I almost feel like if you gave this, which is a weird thing to say, maybe, but if you gave this same movie to Spielberg several movies later, it'd be even stronger.
Right.
And some of the human interactions like that. But something that used to bother me the last time I watched it and reviewed it, I I talked about the mayor and how he seemed just a little bit too unreal to me. And it's certainly nothing has broken this movie for me. Like, I've always loved it, but at the same time, like, if I'm gonna nitpick something here or there, like the mayor, like, oh, that seems a little bit too unreal that he would be that adamant to get people out on that beach. And something about 2020 has made me change my opinion about the mayor and how believable I find that whole sequence of him insisting that summer will happen no matter what, and the economy matters more than having people out on the beach,
Right.
and keeping people alive and away from the beach. God, a shark is not that big of a threat. Still people out there. We'll have people out on watch. Everybody will still be safe. Yeah, my opinion on that has shifted a little bit.
I'm imagining Trump like bitten in half by a great white like Quint saying the water's fine. Come to the beach. 'Cause, I don't want to interject on your point too much, but I think that I'm kind of the same way with you on this because that was something I always, and I don't know if it was that I didn't find it believable, but I was just like, nobody can be that stupid.
Well, that's stupid, but also that empowered to do it.
Right, right,
Like, surely they'd be able to like insist that the beaches be closed.
right. It's just like in recent years, the governments empower in bad situations, and and I don't think this is anything new, but I think it's kind of been on a larger and more public scale that that they will downplay these catastrophic events for their own financial gain or for to avoid panic. In Japan with the Fukushima incident, there was a mishandling of that, several years back, and in a way that was similar to this kind of thing, and um, a movie that I hope we review at some point and do an episode on. Shin Godzilla actually uh, criticizes, is very much a satire and criticism of that kind of thing. And here we are, years later, and we've got the same, almost a similar thing with coronavirus happening on a global scale, and the United States being one of the bigger perpetrators of just misinformation and ignorance um, over this. And I think that Shin Godzilla also feels kind of relevant to that, but Jaws definitely does as well. With Jaws getting this boost of relevance, um, something that I hate that makes it relevant is that people are losing their lives to this virus, and I didn't know anybody personally, but there's someone connected to Christy's family that lost their life, and then I have known people that actually had it, and um, this administration has continually mocked and laughed and rejected notions that it's anything to be feared, even when the president has had it. And if we can get into whether he even actually had it or not, or if he's even himself, if he's been dead for a year and this is a clone, um, there's there's so many crazy things. But going to back to Jaws, the mayor, seeing that kid get killed, which to me, I think that to me that kid getting killed has always been the most haunting part of this movie, when he's out there on the raft,
Sure.
and
And a geyser.
just the amount of blood that comes up, but just the ignorance of that, the and harmful, hateful ignorance. Like, well, it's inconvenient for me that this kid died, but we're going to have money. We're going to have for 4th of July. We're going to we're going to do this. The shark the shark comes back, it's still there. Jaws is still out there. Watching it this time, it really it made me hate the mayor even more. I hated the mayor character already, but this time I hate him for different reasons. But again, I think it is believable, and sadly, it's believable, but it is.
I hate that it's become as relevant as it has been. And obviously, you could look at stories like Chernobyl is another example, and also a recent miniseries in HBO that's incredible,
Right.
that shows the corruptness of government or mishandling of a terrible situation, to say the very least about it. Just the ignorance and the not really believing the gravity of a situation or not caring enough about safety protocols. Bottom dollar ultimately kind of being part of the problem in terms of having it be safe enough to begin with. But yeah, just Jaws had like I'll tell you the least believable thing now is in a sense is the mayor eventually does have a change of heart. Uh, oh, I don't believe that anymore.
Right.
I mean, obviously, I do because that anybody can have a change of heart, but there are also people who wouldn't, and it's almost too much to imagine that there are people that wouldn't ever have that change of heart, that would just stay steadfast regardless of anything that happens, regardless of children dying. Like as you said, seeing a little boy die violently, that should be a turning point, to say the least. But they're just too many things have to happen before they actually do get sent off on their adventure and the beach actually does close. Yeah, it's a startling thing that's become unfortunately relevant in way too large a fashion, and it's changed the way that I've watched Jaws, um, and the way that it affected me in particular right now in this moment. But I also try to get on a different track again, and I'll use Ellen Brody again to do it. That moment when she like sends off her husband and she runs away crying is the last time we see her. It's kind of weird. Like, not that we need uh, to see resolution to every little storyline, but like that to me kind of highlights the problem with her and her character.
Right.
Is like the storyline barely seems to matter to the movie,
Yeah.
and as part of why the third or sorry, not the third, the second half of the movie works so well to me is because those three characters gel so well. I think that's the heart and soul of the movie, and why it works so much is because you have this incredible dynamic between Roy Scheider and Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw. Their adventure out in the water basically is the movie, and it's also probably the biggest headache that they had making the movie, actually being out in the water. The biggest thing that people talk about in terms of behind the scenes of Jaws is the trouble they had with the shark, mechanical shark, and ways that they had to be inventive because showing the bad looking shark and the mechanically failing shark wasn't going to work so well. But all the effort shows in making the movie better, and then the second half is a better movie. Partially probably because of how hard they had to work, but also because the movie also has the focus. It's forced to focus on these three guys. I do think plenty of people have said that this is Spielberg's best movie, and I just plainly don't agree with it. That's just my personal opinion about it being where it sits on the Spielberg pantheon. I think Spielberg became a better filmmaker afterward, but I also think that this movie shaped him. And there's so many great touches, though, that showcase his ability of staging, that showcase his humanity. One of the best scenes in the movie is the scene between Chief Brody and his son.
Right.
That's like one of the best. Like that's the Spielberg magic right there.
Yeah.
You know, that's not going to be seen in most monster movies. Is a scene that stops and does that, but that's the difference. Having little touches like that, seeing the son mimicking his dad, it's really effective. But I also like the way that the movie very subtly deals with like class and different ways of thinking, especially in that main trio. And obviously, you throw a mayor in there too in terms of status and where people fall in the paradigm. But you have the working class Quint coming in and saying he's going to save the day and being very dogmatic about it. Like, I'm going to get the shark. No way I'm not going to get the shark. Just give me the money and I'll do it. Give me the resources, I'll do it. Grumbling his way through it. And then having the wealthy scientist by Richard Dreyfuss, who is not your typical wealthy character in a movie either. But the way that the movie kind of deals with that paradigm by also just making these people real, making those guys in particular feel real, I think is a huge part of the effect of the movie. Like just those guys feel real. I could pick on Ellen Brody probably the entire episode to my heart's content for no good reason because it's not the main part of the movie. But those three guys in particular, very real, and they feel dynamic, and I feel like, oh, I can believe those guys, and I can see the ways in which they all get deflated in one way or another. Because the chief doesn't know anything about being out in a boat or tying these knots, and he gets chastised quite a number of times and ends up nearly breaking Richard Dreyfuss's legs. At one point. That seafaring stuff is just terrific. That's like I said, that's my favorite part of the movie. The adventure stuff, the sharing of scars on the boat, getting drunk, and the way that the Brody looks at a scar briefly, thinking, "Should I share my own scar story?" No, no, that's silly. You shouldn't do that. It's not a good story. Just a tiny little detail like that. There are a lot of little touches in this movie that work so well. But I do still, even though like I love the movie, I ultimately give it a solid A grade.
And that's fair. And I kind of fall in a similar scale on that too. It's for different reasons, but it kind of has to do with like to me, I completely agree with what you said about this Spielberg being. I mean, this is a great Spielberg movie. I mean, don't get us wrong,
Of course,
because it's not like he started out as a chump. I mean, he started out as Spielberg. This is not his first movie, but this is his big break, and it's great, and it is one of his most iconic movies, and there's reason for that. But I do think that even in just a few subsequent years, Spielberg made better movies, and I think that a little bit of I wouldn't call it a problem, but my nitpicking, it kind of has to do with the first act too. Just something about it. The man, even though I do acknowledge that stuff is realistic now, it still just bugs me. And it's not that it's bad, and it's not that, but but there are other aspects of just the whole village, the island segment, that let the the kids pretending to be a shark, and then that guy just like clumsily falling in, trying to help them get it. That part's always kind of been dumb to me. But I mean, it doesn't mean that it's bad, but
no,
just little things. But I think a lot of people, a lot of people talk about Quint, for good reason, because Robert Shaw is amazing in this movie. I think that, and it's not to say I think one's better than the other, but I think Roy Scheider's performance as Brody is just what makes this movie what it is. And he's this good man, and he's kind of an everyman, and but he's faced with this impossible situation, this shark. He doesn't know how to face it. He used to be a big city cop. He's not used to dealing with a shark in the ocean, and he has a mayor that he's pitted against, that he's trying to do what's best for the public and close the beach down, and he's getting pushback at doing that for financial and economic reasons. And then he's got his family that he's worried about. That scene with his son at the table, again, like, that's just such a great moment, great scene. But we see most of this movie through his eyes, and in a lot of ways, he's this is going to be might be a stretch of a comparison, but I've always kind of thought of Brody as kind of like Gary Cooper in High Noon, in that like he's in this situation and he's trying to do the right thing, and everywhere he turns, he's getting pushback, feedback that is resistance, and in the end, he finally ends up having to do it himself. And it's a little different in Jaws, that he's got Hooper and Quint with him on the boat, but ultimately at the end that doesn't matter. It ends up just being him. I think that something I never really realized, and this film and The Exorcist actually are kind of structured similarly, in that The Exorcist begins with, kind of normal life, and then the demon taking over, and we see things through Karras's eyes, and um, at the end, it's almost a whole other movie, a segment, the exorcism itself, and Father Marin is this larger than life character, and ultimately he's taken out of the picture, and Karras has to grab on and do something. And I think it's kind of similar with Jaws, that, we have the shark, we have these scenes, we have the opening scene, of course, with the woman getting pulled under and eaten, the little boy. We had the big, 4th of July celebration, and all these things. But the what we've already alluded to being the best section of the movie is the adventure on sea with Brody, Hooper. Yeah, and Richard Dreyfuss is amazing in this too. I think all three of the main characters are just so great in this, and you're right, they gel together completely. But that's we're on the boat with them. That's what it feels like. But that last section of the movie is just so incredibly intense. With even as comfort, this movie is more comfort food than the other two we've watched. Uh, but that's not a downplay at all. This is a blockbuster. This is a popcorn movie, but it's still intense, and kind of does have that level of despair to it in the end. With Jaws just destroying that boat, that little rinky dink boat that everybody loves so much, the Orca. I just kind of love that Quint is so confident, and he's so, or appears so confident, and but he's terrified, and you can see it even before he dies, which is the obvious part, but you can see it in his eyes, in the performance, in the story of the Indianapolis, that whole section. I mean, you can see these underlying things. And I think the intensity of, the final showdown with Jaws, and, Hooper kind of gets taken out of the picture. Um, not for, he does not die. He kind of led to believe that he might have died or something, but he pops up at the end, survived. But, it's just Brody and Quint. And, Quint's the one we all kind of expect to be equipped to handle this, and he gets killed. And the screams and the terror, and it's unnerving. And Brody takes kind of, not exactly like Karras in The Exorcist, but he's forced to take it upon himself, and be kind of resourceful in the way that he does it. And Tank gets in Jaws' mouth, and you know he he ends up blowing it up. But the build up to that is just so cool, and it's just so intense. It's so well done that it's one of the best stretches of any movie, really. I could put the end of Jaws up against, a lot of different things. And, Jaws would probably come close to coming on top because that is one of the best runs in any movie I've ever seen. This is going to be really funny because I've actually gotten in an argument with somebody, Andy Heath, to be precise, a friend of ours, that this isn't even a horror film, that Jaws isn't a horror movie. And you made it the most. I think you made the most accurate. The first part really kind of is, and I admit that too. That like the first half of this movie really kind of definitely is horror. In the movie, it is a horror movie. But the reason I kind of push back against that back when I've had this argument is that, when I think of Jaws, I think of that last section, the last segment on the ocean. And it's more of an adventure film to me. But the last section of that section is definitely terrifying. It is intense, and uh, it is horror. And so this is a horror movie. I admit being wrong. I'm not going to admit that to Andy Heath's face, but probably because I won't see him anytime soon. But uh, I do think that this is a horror film, but it's got that Spielberg touch and that sense of adventure, and it sets it apart. And this movie was huge. One of the, there have been big box office hits before. We already talked about, I mean, Exorcist was a huge film uh, for its time, and The Godfather, the year before Exorcist, was a huge film. There had been big successes before, but Jaws kind of just broke the doors down and became just the first real blockbuster hit. And, it wouldn't be too long that something else would redefine that a couple of years later. It seems like we always end up mentioning Star Wars for one reason or another. But I mean, it's for good reason. But, Jaws really solidified those that kind of entertainment. And, my mom would always tell me that she was one of the people that was scared to go into the ocean because of Jaws, because she was a teenager when it came out, or a young teenager, and like it just hit pitch perfect. And they would go to the beach in the summers, and she just was very hesitant to get in the water because of Jaws. And it's one of those movies that has that effect, like you know, I'm sure people were afraid to get in showers in hotels because of Psycho for a long time. I'm sure other films have had those kind of reactions, but Jaws definitely, even today, kids, younger, because I consider myself, when I first saw it, Jaws definitely made me scared of water for a little bit. I'll still get in it. I still love getting in the ocean, but when I can, it has one of those long lasting effects on people. And I think it speaks to the power of Spielberg and the power of the movie. But, this is, and to give this an A is not a slap in the face to it at all. Or like, uh,
No.
I think, people might come at me for this. I think Spielberg actually did this type of movie better later with Jurassic Park. Um, it might be a controversial opinion. I don't know, but I think he's done a better version of this. And not to say that they're the same movie, because they're not. They're huge differences. but in terms of there being a little bit of terror and creatures or animals, I do think that Spielberg was a better filmmaker when he made Jurassic Park than he was Jaws. Like you said, if he had made Jaws later on, if he had made it in the 80s or the 90s or whenever he would have made it, it would be better. It would be a better movie. Um, but I think Jaws it deserves its place in not only Spielberg's films, because obviously it's very popular. It is one of the most popular movies of all time, and people still love it. And like you said, there are people that will easily say not only is it their favorite Spielberg movie, it's one of their favorite movies, if not their favorite movie. And I don't have any problem with that. I don't agree personally, but this is a great movie, and I uh, I adore Jaws, but I do think that Spielberg could and did better, not just in that genre, but he made some better films. But that's still kind of nitpicking. This is a great film, and you know that last section, I will take the if I see on TV that Jaws is on and they're on, it's in the last half of the film, forget it. That's what I'm watching, because I'll put that against almost anything.
And yeah, a solid A. Not that we have to elaborate on it too much, but a solid A is far from bad. It's still really excellent. I will never complain about watching Jaws at any point, but it definitely has sections that are some of the best Spielberg material ever. So yeah, Jaws is still a really terrific movie by every which means. And to elaborate on Ellen Brody again, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to keep picking on her. Roy Scheider is so underrated,
Yeah,
and he's in so many great movies, and he's excellent in Jaws. And obviously, that's one huge iconic movie. So some people might say, how could he be underrated? He has Jaws, but I do think that he sometimes gets overshadowed in conversation by other actors that he was around at times. But he's excellent in so many other movies as well. What a great actor, and he's a big part of why Jaws is as good as it is. But like I said before, I think the combination of that trio is at the heart and soul of the movie, and the height of its success. And I love Richard Dreyfuss, who
right.
obviously got along with Spielberg just fine. And I think Spielberg's very next movie was a better movie and one of his best movies.
Yeah,
Close Encounters he got to make after
yeah,
this, which Jaws was so successful, Spielberg had the keys to the kingdom basically. Spielberg could do whatever he wanted, and
right.
he chose to make a movie like Close Encounters, which is almost wild to me in a way, just to imagine. Not to make this whole conversation about Close Encounters, but uh, just the idea that you can make a movie like that. It's hard to imagine today a big budget sci-fi movie like that shot on 70 millimeter film.
Right.
It's just kind of wild. Whereas Jaws is a movie you could imagine in today's marketplace in a certain spirit, at least. And basically, the shooting of the shark is the same as the shooting of the Death Star
Right.
a couple of years later. Is the same sort of thing and the same kind of excitement too, complete with John Williams scores.
Yes.
But that building and anticipation and the perfect timing and explosion, like it's all there. Uh, Same kind of thing, adventure action sort of stuff. yes, Jaws is definitely still a horror movie, but it has those other flavors, same as Jurassic Park, in terms of adventure, horror, action kind of stuff, which is part of the success of the movie.